This car started out life as a basic 327 automatic Corvette. It was purchased by my father, let's say 25 years ago. And this was probably number 30 in the line of Corvettes that my father owned over the years. He was big into the older Chevys, a lot of Novas, a lot of Chevelles, a lot of Camaros, and a lot of Corvettes. I think the Corvettes were really his favorite. When he had gotten the car, it was not painted, and it had been being driven, I think, by somebody. I was young, so I'm kind of sketchy on the details of it. But when this car came to the family, at the time, my father had a 72 big block Corvette that he had restored. It was a 4-speed 454 convertible. That was like a 3-year frame off he did. He also had a 65 Chevelle that he did the floors. He had jammed it. He had redone the interior, and he put a small block with a little B&M blower on it, a little small blower. I don't remember the series blower, but it was probably only making 4 or 5 pounds. It was nothing crazy, but for back in the day, I'm talking like this is like 1995. He had that car, 96. It was a cool street car. And he also had, when I was in high school, he had a Buick Grand National. It was an 87 stock car, not really messed with. It was daily driven. He had bought it from the original owner, but it was decently clean. The paint was nice. It wasn't rusted. The guy, unfortunately, was getting a divorce. He was going through some family changes, so he sold the car. So when this car came to the family, my father, I think, was just getting ready to sell the 72 Vet. He had sold the 66 or 65 shortly after. He bought this, and he had this, and he had the Grand National. And first thing he did was he actually converted it. His car started out as a 327 automatic car, and as you can see by the shifter there, he made it a stick shift. He found a tranny that had the right date codes for the year of the car, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, because I've decoded the VIN on this car does not have a transmission code stamped. So he converted it to the 4-speed, and he actually went through all the trouble and removed the cluster in the car. Let me open the door. He actually removed the cluster in the car and took it apart and changed that tachometer face, because I believe the automatics and the sticks had a different red line. And he didn't want really anybody who knew these cars to see it and to say, oh, this car was an automatic. It has a different tack face. Or this car's a stick, but it doesn't have the right tack face. Why is that? So he went through the trouble. He converted it. Kept the engine. Now the engine, here, I'll pop the hood. The engine, he rebuilt. I don't know the specs of it, but this car runs well. It's got good power for the size of the car. It moves well. So if I had to guess, knowing my father, he probably did a basic rebuild. It's probably a 30 over, and it probably has like a quarter cam in it. Just something a little extra to give it some oomph. But this car is a 327, but it's the 350 horse rated 327, so it's the highest that came of a small block in this year car. So stock, it was probably pretty quick. It's a fiberglass car. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not like super lightweight, but I gotta say, with the stick shift, and I'm not sure what the gearing is in the rear end, but this car, man, the first 3 gears, I took it out the other day after I got done doing some work on it, and I mean, I'm talking barking second, barking third. I mean, you shift third hard, it'll bark the tires. It moves pretty good. Doesn't have much for the top end. Top end, it runs out of gas. It's like a around the block type of car. 1, 2, 3, it cranks, and then you hit fourth, and you kind of top out. I wouldn't get on that. You're not going to get on the highway and go, 150 miles an hour, but for driving around town, it's very fun. So he had converted it, he rebuilt the engine, and he ended up getting sick in the time he was working on it. He did get to drive the car. He did drive. It was in primer. The body wasn't finished. He was working on that at the time, but I think he had gotten all the mechanics of the car pretty much at the time straightened out. And he ended up getting lymphoma, he ended up getting cancer, and he battled that, and unfortunately ended up passing away from that, and the car did not get finished. It was running, it was moving, but the bodywork wasn't done, it wasn't painted, it was still missing some parts. So a good friend of his, who I knew from being a kid, going over to his shop that was very close to my house, he was a Corvette guy, a local guy that a lot of Corvette people know. he ended up coming by the house. According to my mother, he stopped by the house shortly after my father had passed. I was probably in school that day. I wasn't home. And, he knocked on the door. He thought my father was home. My father always worked second shift, so my father was usually home till 3 o'clock in the afternoon when he would, or 2:30 when he would leave to go to work. So he stopped by. My mother answered the door. My mother had to break it to him like, hey, sorry, he passed. He was sick. I believe the gentleman knew my father was sick, but didn't really know the extent. They weren't like best friends, but they were car guys. So maybe the guy at the time, needed a part or was looking for something, was coming to ask my dad about it, and then got the news dropped on him. So he had mentioned to my mother, hey, what was Donnie working on? Does he still have the 66? My mom said, yes, we'd like to get the car finished. So the gentleman took the car, and he ended up finishing it. It took a long time, and the quality of the finish, I was never happy with. I was very young when I saw my father do the cars that he did, but I could tell when I was young the quality my father would put into things. And my father was very patient. I'm not as patient. I work on it every day, but my father would take his time. If the car took an extra couple months, I don't think he cared. It wasn't something he was doing for profit. He was never trying to make money. It was his passion. He worked as a welder. That was his trade, and he made good money with that, and he was happy with that as his trade and this as his hobby. So he wasn't like trying to flip them. He wasn't trying to bang them out, get them done, get them down the road, get another car in. When he was doing the car, he was doing the car the way he wanted. So long story short, the gentleman finished the car, and my mother, believe it or not, non-power steering, non-power brake, stick shift car. My mother's been driving this car. It's been 20 years since it's been done. It just hit 20 years last year that my father had, or actually, yeah, it was 20 years last year, early last year, that my father had passed away, and this car was finished a couple years after he had passed. So it's been 18 years she's been driving this Corvette. And she was driving it, no power steering, no power brakes, stick shift. And it started having some issues last year. The steering column got really loose in it. It was grounding out when you would turn the wheel. It would sound off the horn. The paint was needing a significant revival. And I said to my mother, I said, I don't know how you drive this car. Like, I cannot take this car. Like, it's like driving a cement truck. They ride decent. The car rides nice. It's not rattly. It's not like a tin can. But no power steering, no power brakes. You got to stand on the brakes for it to stop. It is a four-wheel disc with 4-piston calipers all around, believe it or not, in 1966. But you still got to clamp those calipers down. So that's all your foot, because they had a single cylinder, non-power brakes in it, no power steering. The column was messed up, and it was having a problem with the brake switch. The brake lights were staying on. It was killing the battery, and there was just other little odds and ends that needed. So I said to my mother this year, I said, you know what? I'm going to take the car. I'm going to start updating the car, and we're going to do some work to the car. So over the last few weeks, and I didn't shoot any of this stuff, and I apologize, and maybe if this video gets some good feedback, I could do a walkthrough of how I did it. But I basically bought a couple kits. This is a 67 power brake dual master cylinder upgrade. So it basically comes with the booster, with the master. You do have to do some modifying to the firewall, minimal, but you do have to do it. I had to take the steering column out of it, which I had to repair the column anyway, so that was kind of 1 for 2. Did have to run, the lines come all pre-bent, proportioning valve. I did have to change the line that goes down under the steering box along the frame. There's a block there. I had to change that block. Then I had to change the line that goes down underneath the frame of the car down here, and then there's another proportioning block near the back. I had to change that. Besides those, that was basically the extent of the install. And then obviously it already had the port right there. It's kind of hard to see under the air cleaner. I already had the port for the vacuum. It was just plugged, so I just had to run a hose, and the engine makes plenty of vacuum. I mean, it's got a little bit of a cam, but it's nothing crazy. So that was a pretty straightforward install. Then we went on to the steering. So I bought a Borgenson built kit. So it comes with the box, comes with the hoses, comes with a standard Saginaw style Chevy pump that they use for, I don't know, hundreds of years, for God's sakes. They use forever. Not that long, but they use for a long time. It did not come with the needed pulleys. I had to find a pulley that came off of a car that had factory power steering. I actually had to modify the pulley to get the spacing right, and I had to modify the crank pulley some. that was about, I had to modify the pulleys. I did have to modify the steering column. So this coupler here that connects to the steering shaft, where this box comes up, it's a lot longer. The stock box stops like right at this silver cap. Like the box is small, a non-power steering box, but the power box, it's much larger. So I had to take the column out when I did the booster to work underneath the dash. The column needed to be repaired, but I actually had to take off in the steering shaft, which is not really easy to see. This steering shaft, I had to cut 2 solid inches off this steering shaft. I had to mock it up, I had to measure it, make sure the distance of the column to the driver inside was the same as it was, and I had to modify the column and cut it and then piece it all together. I had to modify the pulleys. I did have to modify some of the bracketry for this alternator to mess with the spacing, because the alternator belt wanted to rub, it's hard to see, but it wanted to rub down on the front face of this. So it was technically a bolt-on kit, but like anything else that's bolt-on, it wasn't necessarily bolt-on. There was some modifications that had to be done. So I finished that up last week. I took the car out, and it's like driving a new car. The steering column's nice and tight. I basically rebuilt it. I gave it a fresh coat of paint. I mean, it looks nice and clean. It was all chipped up and it looked beat up. I sanded it, I painted it. Put the power brakes, obviously the power steering, and the car drives like it's like a night and day difference. It drives like the car should drive. You're not fighting it. If you're in a parking lot, you got to make a U-turn. You're not fighting the wheel. I mean, driving non-power steering is okay, but once you're stopped, I mean, it's just a nightmare. I didn't like it. I don't even know how my mother drove it for all those years the way she did. So last thing I did is I did buff the car. If people are interested, I can go over how I did that, but this is basically an old style lacquer paint job. So I just basically went at it with a wool wheel and some heavy compound, and I just started buffing it. And it actually probably could use a couple more buffs. It's cracking, it's showing its age. I mean, it's over 20 years. You can see cracking. There's been some repair here. You can see, it might be hard to pick up in the camera, but there's a line that's been repaired. You can actually see some of the fiberglass matting texture. So the paint is, I mean, it's cracking here. It's lacquer, it's fiberglass, the car flexes, so it is what it is. But the buffing really brought the life back out in the paint, because the paint was looking really chalky and really dull. So that's been about a month and a half, 2 months I've been on and off working on this car. I didn't shoot any video on it, unfortunately, because I've been busy with other things. But I wanted to take this time, show you the car, go over it. The next thing that's going to be done, and I'm going to try to shoot the video on this start to finish, is I've been talking to my mother, and the carburetor was giving me a little bit of trouble. It was leaking a little bit. I got that fixed. It runs good, but it doesn't run as good as it can. Fuel injection kits are getting very inexpensive these days, so we're going to upgrade this to a fuel injection system. We're going to get rid of that points and condenser setup and vacuum, advanced distributor. We're going to go modern EFI with an HEI ignition on it, and we're going to bring this car where it should be really turnkey for her. Start it up, drive it, no muss, no fuss. So I just want to shoot this video, show you guys what we got, what we're working on. I'm going to post this up soon. And I also want to say thank you for all my new subscribers. Thank you for all the people that have been joining the channel. My channel's really been coming up over the last couple months. I'm getting a lot of new subscribers, and I appreciate it. Appreciate you guys checking it out. So I'm going to throw this up, and if you guys like it, throw a comment, throw a like, and subscribe and share it. So hopefully over the next week or so, I'm going to start ordering parts today. It might take a few days for them to come in, depending with all this craziness in the world. You never know. It could be next day, it could be a week. But I'm going to order the kit for the fuel injection and the HEI, and we're going to do that next to this car. I'm going to try to get this car where it's going to be turnkey for my mom. She can get in it, she can start it and drive it, or if I use it or my brother uses it, we don't have to worry about, the carburetor leaking, giving us problems. I mean, it's run pretty reliable all these years, but you know what? At this point, the car is never leaving the family. The car is original to a certain degree, but it does not have to stay 100% original. We'll keep all the stuff we take off of it, but at the end of the day, I want the car to be enjoyable for the family. I want it to be reliable, and I want it to run the way it should run. So, like I said, thank you guys for checking me out. Thank you for all the comments and the likes and the subscribes, and I'll check you guys later.